Hey everyone, this is Kevin from Meditation Magazine. I'm here with Joseph Goldstein. He's an amazing Buddhist spiritual teacher. He is one of the founders of the Insight Meditation Society, as well as Dharma.org, and has written books and is one of the great teachers of our time for Buddhists and for spiritual aspirants alike. So thank you for being here, Joseph. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Great to be here.
So I'd like to start out just by introducing what we're going to be talking about today to anybody who's watching, and also just for me and you, Joseph, to be sort of on the same page about the conversation. Basically, I have been struggling with figuring out what the next issue of Meditation Magazine is going to be. So this last issue, the 2024 issue, which the Dalai Lama was gracious enough to send us an essay, and we had an interview with Guru Dev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and some really amazing luminaries. And the reason I think that we were able to attract these types of amazing luminaries is because of the topic of the issue. The topic of the issue was peace, is the peace issue. And in early 2024, I knew very clearly that it needed to be the peace issue because of what was going on in the world in 2024. 2025, we're facing a little bit of a different situation. We're facing what we could see as perhaps a crisis in democracy here in this country, the falling apart of systems and the destruction of what we've known for our whole lives as our government, essentially. That's one way to look at it. Other people look at it in a totally different way. Other people look at it in a way of a renaissance of getting rid of bureaucracy and things like that, and paying off our national debt and advancing technology. So there are very different ways that people look at these things that are happening, and that's what's making it very confusing for me. I think in the peace issue, it was very clear to me that peace is better than war. Peace is better than violence. Um, but when it comes to what's going on in the U.S. right now, and I think, should I be making a strong stand? Should I stand up against things? Or are people actually trying to do good things and I'm just not really understanding their motivations or their intentions or their methods or their value systems, and that is all made more hazy and more difficult to understand when we look at just the media and we see basically propaganda coming from both sides of the political spectrum, and it becomes very difficult to tease apart what's true and what's propaganda. And so I'm hoping that through our conversation, we'll just kind of, Buddhism is one of the great things about Buddhism is about just like encountering reality directly. The insight meditation is, about being able to have clear seeing. And I'm hoping that you'll help me have a little bit more clear seeing by the end of our conversation today. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to offer you and ask you if you'd like to lead a meditation for maybe 5 minutes, maybe anything that you feel is appropriate to go into this conversation that may help us to be able to have more clear minds and to be able to get deeper into this topic.
Great. Yeah. So we'll do just a very basic meditation, and it really has to do with calming the mind and collecting the attention, which is always a helpful thing to do. So take a comfortable seat, a meditative posture, whatever is suitable for you. A relaxed posture, but also one that is alert. In our tradition, generally we close the eyes, but people can also sit with the eyes slightly open if that's what they're used to. You can begin by taking a few deep breaths, just as a way of arriving, settling into the body. So 2 or 3 deep breaths. And then let the breath find its own natural rhythm without forcing, without interfering. Simply feeling the sensations of each in-breath, feeling the sensations of each out-breath. Keeping in mind that it's not a breathing exercise, but it's an exercise in awareness, an exercise in steadying the attention. So breathing in, know you're breathing in. Breathing out, know you're breathing out. It's really that simple. You may begin to notice where in the body you feel the breath most clearly. Is it the air passing the nostrils, the movement of the chest, the abdomen? Do you feel it throughout the whole body? Let the mind settle in that place wherever it's most clear, the natural inhalation and exhalation process. As the breath follows its own natural rhythm, simply notice which in and out breath may be short or may be long, smooth or a little rough. And it's not to change anything, it's simply to notice how each breath is showing itself. Feeling each breath from beginning through the middle to the end. Staying steady on the out breath from the beginning, middle to the end. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, connecting with the world around you now. This is the answer to every question you might have, Kevin.
Maybe, maybe. Yeah. This is the ultimate answer, right? The relative answers may be
Complicated.
more complicated. Yeah. You know, I first of all, thank you so much for that beautiful meditation. I wanted to thank anybody who's watching right now, and feel free to comment, say hi, ask questions, and maybe we can incorporate them into our conversation. So, and we'd love to just be able to see your comments and just be able to say hi to you. Okay, so in that meditation, I did feel some monkey mind moving through, jumping around a little bit. You know, some of the questions that I've been thinking about that I've been wanting to ask, and neither of us, as you mentioned earlier, neither before we went live, we were talking, and neither of us is a politician. We are meditation guys. You know, we just we like to meditate and teach people meditation, help people meditate, and spread the love and peace and all that. But when it comes to politics, you know, neither of us is really an insider. We are observers. I would say, like most of our audience can relate to that. Most of our audience is not insiders in politics. We're observers, we're meditators, and we want to understand what is going on. And we want to know how, you know, how we can even approach media or politics and understand clearly. I think, you know, I think actually most people in the country, most people in the world who don't meditate are actually, they think that they know about politics more than we meditators think that we know, because we know that we don't know sometimes, you know, that we break down our own belief systems. We realize that, like the Buddha said, any, you know, viewpoints, it's all a fetter of views, or a what did he call it? I don't know, something like that. A
A net of views.
yeah, it's like a mess. It's a mess. It's like a forest of views. I don't remember his exact words, but basically, like, there's so many ways that you could perceive reality, and when we meditate, we realize this, and we start to see through the idea that anybody really knows what's going on, or that anybody really knows more than others. So what I'm trying to figure out, like I mentioned earlier, is before our conversation, or at the beginning of this conversation, is that I'm trying to figure out what to do with our upcoming issue. So the peace issue, it really hit me. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. And because it was clear that the world needed peace, and that was the main thing. However, in 2025, I've been going back and forth between a few different ideas for what the issue should be. The warrior issue, for example. After my conversation with Marianne Williamson a few weeks ago, you know, she's clearly the type to say, stand up, stand against the things that you believe are wrong, and things like that. And maybe that's what we should be doing. Maybe that's how we should respond to this whole situation. Another idea would be the balance issue, sort of seeing both sides of things and understanding that. But that's a different approach, and it's a different way of responding to the situation than standing up for one side of things. And another idea would be, for example, the change issue, realizing the deep truth, the mark of existence of anicca, that everything is always changing. And that's been happening since the beginning of the universe. And this is just part of that. And that's sort of another kind of neutral kind of way of looking at it. But maybe that could be seen as sort of a spiritual bypassing, where we're not taking action when we need to be taking action in the world of humans. So basically, I've been going back and forth with this for a long time, and I decided, you know what, I need to talk to Joseph Goldstein about this, and I need to have some conversations with people and try to work through what do we do in this situation? How do we respond? Do we fight? Do we try to see the truth in both sides? Do we relax and go with the flow? And I think that the answer to that question inevitably is going to depend on our perception of what's actually happening. And if we see, oh, you know what, evil people are actually trying to destroy our democracy and take over and become dictators, that leads to one type of response. Maybe that would be the fight issue, the warrior issue, or whatever. um, or we might see reality differently, like, hey, some people have libertarian viewpoints and they are trying to reduce bureaucracy and reduce the federal deficit, and maybe we should let them do that. I don't know, in some way. But I am I'm a little bit confused, as you can see. So I want to get your I just want to get your thoughts on this whole situation and what you think about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
A small little topic to discuss.
Yeah, it's very deep. Yeah.
So, first to say that
Mhm.
I think our response can be a combination of all three approaches you had, rather than thinking only one is correct. And for me, the way of integrating the possibility of playing with different approaches has to start with the quality of our own minds and how we're perceiving the situation. So for me, there are two fundamental qualities that we need to strengthen in ourselves, which will enable us to make some wise choices in all of these situations. So the first of them really is establishing and strengthening the quality of equanimity. Because if we are just responding from a place of our own reactivity, we all have various views and opinions and habituated ways of being in different situations. If we're just acting out those habit patterns of conditioning, that is not necessarily going to be the way of seeing things most clearly, right? Because we're just coming to it with our own inherent biases.
Mm-hmm.
Developing equanimity, I think, is really the basis for being able to see clearly. So then the question is, how can we begin to cultivate a little more equanimity in the situation? And for me, and you mentioned this,
Oh, I think you might be frozen, or maybe the internet dropped where you are. Joseph, are you able to hear me? Let me just check on my own internet. Okay, is anybody else able to hear me? Because I'm just checking my internet here. If you're watching, please feel free to comment. Yeah, I think my internet's working well. Can anybody hear me? Oh, okay. Thank you, Halona. Thank you for letting me know that you can hear me. Is my video coming through clearly? I'm just wondering about if it's an issue on my end or on Joseph's end. Upload. Hmm. I don't know. It looks like my internet's working pretty well. So, Halona or anybody else, can you tell me if my video is coming through clearly or if it's sort of glitching? And are you able to see? Were you able to see? Yeah, my video is good. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your comments there. I really appreciate it. So it seems like Joseph's internet may have dropped, and maybe now would be a good time for some of the equanimity that Joseph was talking about. And we can sit with a little bit of equanimity while we wait, or, not wait, but be in the present moment. Oops, sorry about that. We're here in the present moment, and hopefully Joseph will be able to figure out his internet. And I'm just going to send him one more email. His emails. Okay, he sees his email. Hopefully he'll come back in a moment. I'll tell him he can join from his phone. All right, hopefully he'll figure it out. In the meantime, I would love to just sit in meditation with you for a few moments, and while we are here. Oh, I see Joseph's there.
Okay, I'm on my phone now. Okay.
Nice. Yeah, that seems a lot clearer, actually. Yeah, that's
Okay.
great.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I guess I'll close my iPad and just do it on the phone then for some reason.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
There we
Okay.
go. All
So
right. Nice.
this is a
So you know
little
what we
hard.
did? You know what we did while we were waiting for you to get back, or not waiting, but being in the present moment, here.
Uh-huh.
Um, we were practicing a little bit of equanimity,
Good
yeah,
idea.
yeah. So you were talking about practicing equanimity as a way to be able to respond better and to be able to perceive better. Do you
Right.
want to continue with that? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and also, yeah, I'd love to get your, deep understanding of equanimity and how we can practice that in a way that doesn't stop us from engaging with the
Yeah.
world, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yes,
Mhm.
I do. So, just in terms of something that's helped me tremendously, and you alluded to it in your opening,
Mm,
uh, is um, tuning into the historical perspective, the large historical perspective. And I've just finished listening to a book on Audible. It's called The Fall of Civilizations.
mm,
Really interesting book. And
mm,
it goes back to ancient Sumeria, tracing the rising and flourishing and decline, I don't know, maybe 15 or so different civilizations around the world. And it describes the whole process of their growth and flourishing and the decline and why the decline happened. And by the time the 15th,
mm,
story was told, it became so clear that this is an inevitable part of the process, just as you
mm,
said, because it just reflects the great truth of change, that everything, both personally in our own mind and body, but also in society, everything arises out of causes and conditions, and they change, and the situation changes. So this is inevitable. As that really sunk into me, that this is happening on a global scale as well as an individual, I could really feel my heart relax a bit.
mm,
Okay, this is just what happens. And whether we're actually in that place of the decline of the civilization, our civilization or not, who knows? I'm not making a judgment about that. But at some point, it will happen because it's an inevitable part of the truth of change. So when I get into that mode, when I remember that, then I can begin to actually see what's going on from a place of interest rather than reactivity. Say, oh, this is really interesting. This is part of a much bigger cycle than the immediacy of just what's happening right now. Right. And so it really does create a sense of greater inner ease. And out of that inner ease, it opens up the possibility then for us to see more clearly, okay, what actually is going on, because we're not seeing it through the filter of our own particular conditioning, our own particular habit patterns. Right? So it just creates a space of greater clarity.
Yeah.
What's really important, though, as I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar kind of with the Buddha's teachings, but within the teachings, there's something called the near enemy of equanimity, which is indifference, right? So that could be a quality that it looks like equanimity, but it's not. And so it's really important as we're talking about cultivating this equanimity state to realize that it's not indifference, it's not caring. It's rather, one might say, it's impartiality, or it's having the mind become like space, which can hold everything. So hold everything impartially in the sense of, okay, we see the whole range. But then the question is, from that clarity, what is it that at appropriate times would motivate us to act? Right? So it doesn't turn into indifference. And this is where it's really important to infuse equanimity with compassion, right? And because compassion, Thich Nhat Hanh had a wonderful expression for compassion. He said, compassion is a verb, right? And what I understand him to mean by that is, yes, when we have compassion, then we're moved to act in the face of suffering, right? So if we can combine the equanimity of relaxing back, openness, non-reactivity with compassion, so then the question is, how do we sort all of it out, given the complexity of what's going on? So just a few thoughts which come to my mind about that. One is, it actually was the title of a book written back in the 60s or 70s by Ram Dass and Paul Gorman. It was called How Can I Help? And I love that title. That title has become like a mantra of compassion for me in my life. And so if we go through the day, whether it's on a very minimal level or we are undertaking big things, if that's the question, the koan that we're living with, okay, in this situation, how can I help? Then it's really a question of seeing, in any particular situation, is there something I can do or not? Because sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. So rather than have a general belief, oh, I have to get out there and do something about everything, which is impossible. If we have an equanimous mind, suffused with compassion, the desire to help, how can I help? So then we begin to look very specifically, is it with the people who live next door? Is it in our local community? Is it a national movement? Right. So we begin to just suss out, okay, where can my energy actually be most effective? So I think that's one way of approaching it. A caution, and I've seen this in myself, and I think it's pretty widespread. With whatever particular viewpoint we may have, we tend to get very attached to it and really paint in a very broad strokes everything in alignment with our point of view is correct, and who's ever voicing the other point of view by definition is wrong, and that everything they do is wrong, right? And that, I think, is not helpful, because I think it would be more helpful to really look at individual policies rather than the person who's propounding them. Because we may have very strong views about the person and then discount anything that that person says or wants to do, because we have such strong views about who they are and their character and all that. But sometimes good policies can come from people that we don't agree with at all and don't like it all. But the policy may happen to be appropriate. So if we can separate out our instinctive reaction to the people involved and then look, okay, is this proposed policy, how does that feel? Does this feel something that's good, is going to serve people? Is it something that really, this is terrible and is going to cause a lot of harm? Then at least we have a more focused approach to answering the question, how can I help?
Yeah.
Because we're really focusing in on the very issue and not taking on this whole big global thing because of the person involved.
Yeah. I love how you tied it all together with the "How can I help" mantra, because that really does tie together a lot of what you were just talking about. I think it's really, really great idea to focus on how we can help locally, and how we can help, in small ways, not just in big ways. And focusing on the policies specifically can allow us to separate, like you said, separate out instead of having to protest, Donald Trump and Elon Musk as like blanket things or whatever, because we
Right.
don't necessarily disagree with everything that they're doing. Some things can be good, like
Yes. Yeah.
um, to be able to say, okay, I'm specifically against. I'm going to protest or do something to try to stop the deportations of separation of families or something like that.
Yes.
Things like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I think that's a really good advice for people who want to be able to take political action in a mindful way. But I was thinking about that, and uh, the thing that um, I guess the part where you sometimes have to look at the person and the motivations of the person, let's say the Donald Trump or whatever,
Mm.
or the Elon Musk, if you want to try to understand their motivations, well, I think there's a reason to understand their motivations. I think there's a reason to understand them as a person and sort of as a big picture entity that is taking these actions rather than only looking at the policies themselves. Because, for example, if we if we can understand that perhaps uh, maybe Elon Musk, right, is an interesting example because he always seemed like he was trying to save the world and he was trying to make a green technology and he was trying to save the environment. Suddenly took a very strange turn in his actions and his beliefs and everything. If there are some who would suggest that perhaps he's still trying to save the world and he's just doing it in the way that he thinks is right, that maybe we disagree with, but there are others that might perceive or believe that actually no, he's been just after power the whole time, and now he's got power, he's trying to get more power and become sort of a dictator, and just become the king of the world or something like that. So if we look at this person, this individual, and we have these very different ways that we could perceive who this person is, it allows us, it gives us a little bit of insight into, should we do something to stop this person, or maybe let's let this person do his thing. You know what I mean? It gives us a little bit of a different response depending on what the actual motivations and character of the person is. Do you know what I mean?
I do, but uh, I have a little a little pushback in that.
Good. I love pushback. That's my favorite. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's hard enough to know our own motivations, much less to know somebody else's. And my experience is that in myself, sometimes the motivation can be very clear, but very often motivations are mixed. It's not just one thing. Our minds and our hearts are very complex, and we have many different sides. Uh, and sometimes, even in doing the same action, there can be a whole series of motivations that come into play. So I'll just give you an example of that. As a little background story. This it's on a very small scale, of course. One time I was on a self-retreat and I was reading some Buddhist texts, and I came across a story in the texts that I thought my colleague, Sharon Salzberg, who was writing a book, I thought it would be a good story for her book. So that was the first thought in my mind. I thought, oh, good, I'll give her this story. And then the very next thought was, no, I think I'll keep this story for myself, because for a Dharma teacher, a good story is gold. So then I saw that thought. And then the next thought was, no, that's just being selfish. I should just give her the story. So I said, okay, I'll give her the story, but I'll tell her everything my mind went through so she really appreciates what I'm doing. So it went on and on and on like that, one thought after another of very mixed motivations. And finally, as I was watching my mind and also amused by it, because this was not of huge significance, of course, I said, well, where's the purity in all of that? And I said, yeah, in the very first moment, it was there, that first impulse.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's enough awareness of our own motivations, then we can track it like that and maybe come back to that place of purity. But most people, unless they've trained their minds to really be watching their minds, will not be tracking all of these mixed motivations. They'll just end up acting as they do, but it's not based on a single motivation. So that's why it gets a little tricky when we try to, whether it's Elon Musk or anybody else. I mean, even take it from the other political side, we might look at why Joe Biden decided to run for a second term. That people could have all kinds of ideas of what his motivation was, and then respond depending on their idea of what it was. And I would imagine that, based on my own experience, that there might very well have been a lot of mixed motivations. And that's why I think it's better to focus on the action or the policy, or because then it's clear, this, at least from our perspective, is this policy harmful? Is
Yeah.
this policy helpful to people?
Yeah. That makes
Independent
sense.
of independent of what the motivation is.
You're right.
And then
So
we could say, if somebody is proposing one policy after another, which are all harmful, then we might say, yeah, this guy ought to go.
right. So that brings me to what my next sort of direction in this thought, in this conversation. So motivations maybe is what motivates you to take a specific action, but character, let's say, character is sort of the conglomeration, the aggregate of all of these motivations and actions and everything. And maybe it's hard, we can't perceive other people's motivations necessarily, just like it's hard to perceive our own. But can we perceive character? You know, if we look at someone's long-term patterns of action, maybe their character arc over time, do you think that it's possible or wise to try to, evaluate and predict that?
Yeah, sure. And I think we all do, and we have our opinions. But even given that, for example, in the current situation, in response to the question, how can I help? I don't think there's much we can do to help change the character of the people involved. I think there are things we can do to change or push back or resist certain policies. So
Well,
yes, uh-huh.
yeah, there are things that we can do not to necessarily change their characters, though obviously we can try, through meditation we can try to spread the awareness of awareness itself,
Sure,
and we can try
sure.
to have people, help people change in that way. But usually trying to change people is a difficult game. But what we can do is, instead of trying to change people, we could change people, meaning like change to a different person in power, for example. So that we do that through our process of voting in the United
Yes,
States.
yeah,
And
absolutely,
right,
absolutely.
so the voting actually, and I think maybe this is where sort of the rubber meets the road of what we can actually do. But when I remember, so the whole time, this is just my personal perceptions. Okay. So the whole time that Donald Trump, when he started, I mean, I always thought he was like a selfish guy and just cared about himself. And it seemed like that the whole way through. It didn't seem particularly intelligent, just, selfish and very brash. And I didn't particularly like that character. So I would say, let me obviously vote for anybody who's better than that. But then, I actually started following Elon Musk from the beginning. So right when he was started Tesla and all those things, and I thought this guy's great. He's like trying to change the world through environmentalism and things like that. And I've seen his character arc really, really change, obviously, over the years. But when he jumped in on the MAGA train and he joined Donald Trump's campaign and tried to help him, and now sort of becoming some king or
Hmm.
second, a double co-president or whatever he ended up becoming. Um, I obviously I have to question his character and his motivations. And but at the time that he started joining Trump's campaign, and also somebody else I had respected from 2020, Tulsi Gabbard, who was always very against war, and she joined his campaign. And then I mean, I don't necessarily agree with everything that he says or does, but RFK Jr. wanting to make America healthy and like stop big companies from using bad chemicals in our food and things like that. I thought, there's some good people joining this group, like this campaign. Like, what is their motivation? If their motivation is actually altruistic, maybe this team can actually be a good team. And it made me. I ended up being full disclosure. I ended up voting for Kamala in the end because I thought her message of compassion and stuff was better than the messages that were coming out of the other side. But it did give me pause, and I think a lot of people had that pause. When people saw very intelligent Elon Musk joining this group that was seen as unintelligent, this anti-war Tulsi Gabbard joining this group, the anti like Monsanto type of people like RFK joining this group. People in the spiritual community, I think even a lot of people in the spiritual community were like, well, actually, maybe this is not a bad team. And probably a lot of people voted for them. Clearly, a lot of people voted for them because of that, because of this perception that actually their character is not as bad as we thought. However, there is also the possibility that these people like Musk and Gabbard are joined this team in order to gain more power. And if that was truly their motivation and therefore their character in the end, then that gives us a different a different motivation for what we should do. If these people are joining as, hey, they're showing their true colors, their actual character is they're just after power, they're going to sacrifice their values and principles in order to gain that power, then maybe we should be like, no, 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 this is bad, and we should do everything we can to keep them out. But if their motivation is actually altruistic, perhaps we should give them a chance, like specifically people like Musk, who's done such incredible things, huge great things, along with all the other things that he's done. So you know what I mean. So this is why I think it may be so important to try to evaluate like their character in terms of are they doing this for good reasons, for altruistic reasons, or are they lying about that in order to take power? And I'm not really sure how to know that.
Well, that's the question. I mean, and so if a question either is unanswerable or extremely hard to answer, maybe it's the wrong question, And so just as you were speaking, so this is just looking at it from a slightly different angle, perhaps. But uh, I know people kind of locally who basically are supporters of Trump, and they are really nice, good people, right? And with very similar values. And so it was always interesting to me, since I have some very strong opinions and views about this as well. Uh, well, how can that be? How can somebody who's, an intelligent, good-hearted person have completely opposite view on this person, right? And so I think we have to be willing to engage as a way of understanding the complexity of all of this. I think we really have to engage with people who have an opposite view to us, for example, about Trump or Musk or Biden or anybody else, and not try to convince them of anything, but try to learn, okay, well, what is it that you see in them? Because if we're speaking to somebody who we know to be good people, and we might learn something that we didn't know before. Of okay, well, what is the appeal, and is there value in what they're seeing that we're not seeing? So to me, before jumping to a conclusion about a person's motives being totally good or totally bad, which is really hard to know, even though we do have views about it. And it may be that somebody is mostly good or mostly bad. But by engaging with people who have a different perspective and are seeing things differently, that might actually help us answer the question, how can I help address what I think is not right? Because I'm understanding more clearly how the other person is viewing things.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if we don't know that, then we may have some idea of how I can help, and we'll go charging in and do the very thing which just turns more people off.
yeah, yeah, it's true. And I think what you're saying is very important about engaging with people that disagree with us. I have actually been trying to find those in the like meditative spiritual community. I know there are many, but I'm always looking toward the leaders in our community. You as an example, and others that I'm interviewing over the next weeks. And I've found that most of the meditative and spiritual leaders are leaning toward toward the let's say the liberal side of the political spectrum, and most of them do. Um, I'm sure there are some that I'm not thinking of
I
that,
would expand beyond the leader. I would go
yeah.
to, I would just go to ordinary people who may not have anything to do with meditation, but
Well,
who,
those are easier to find, obviously. The ones
yeah,
that are that don't have to do with meditation are easy to find. You just go outside and you just talk to anybody, and half of the time you'll catch a Trump supporter. Like, I'm in Miami, and half of the people here are probably more are happy or with what's going on.
but
Um, so that's relatively easy to find, but a lot of those people haven't really, maybe they don't do the deep introspective kind of work, and they have very different value systems, and maybe that's something that maybe we can try to understand their value systems. A lot of the time when I talk to people that are Trump supporters, their value systems are based on I don't know, like it's hard to even see it because they won't say it explicitly. I think sometimes it has to do with the belief that certain races are better than others or smarter than others. There's I honestly, it's hard to say, but I think it's true. I think there's a lot of people that have just, very dark motivations or dark, sort of self-centered, self-serving motivations for liking Trump and his crew. But I think that there are those who have done the introspective work and have a deep spiritual perspective and have just truly aligned values, that the values are aligned with what they're doing, what Trump is doing. And I want to find those people. Even I'm going to actually email our meditation magazine mailing list. I'm going to ask to if anybody has like a voice that they want to add to this conversation, a Trumpian or a conservative voice that they want to add to the conversation. I think that will be a good idea to engage with them.
yeah,
You know,
I think it would be really helpful. And again, yeah, there, I'm sure there are many people with the kind of motivations which we would not at all be in alignment with. But as I was
yeah,
saying, the people that I know, uh, they are good-hearted people.
yeah.
You know,
I know, I know,
it's
I
not
know
that
some
their
of them.
values are, kind of dark, power hungry.
Mm,
They're just seeing things because of their own background and conditioning. They're just seeing things from a different perspective. And that's why I haven't had this conversation with anybody like this, but I would
mm,
like to.
mm,
My imagination of the best way to proceed would be not to talk in generalities, but after trying to elicit, okay, well, what do you see your value in this, or why do you appreciate what he's doing, to actually then talk about specific policies,
mhm.
because that's where I think there could be an interesting exchange. You
Yeah,
know,
for sure. I
uh,
think I actually printed out some notes on some specific policies, but oh, here they are. I know, actually, I don't know where I put them, but oh, here they are. But I got a bunch of notes. Um, but so I think that there are, when you talk about good-hearted people with similar value systems to ours, some meditative spiritual value systems,
no, no, not even
that
that. Just being kind.
just being kind.
I like your T-shirt.
Oh yeah, thank
Because
you, thank you.
I, I mean, there are lots of people out there who are kind people, but who
Hmm.
have a very different take on things.
Right, right. So, what I'm trying to figure out partly is, I think there are two reasons that people, let's say kind people, end up with different perspectives. So, such polarized perspectives. Let's say a kind person who has the perspective that um, what Trump and Musk and their team or whatever are doing is wrong and bad, and should be stopped, and then others that see it as good and they're doing a great job. And kind people may have both of those. Different kind people may have each of those very polarized perceptions. And what I'm thinking is that it can come down to really one of two things. Well, one of three things. One that's the easiest to dismiss is, and just to dismiss people by saying they're just uninformed. They don't know
Right,
what they're
right,
talking about,
right.
and they just, don't know anything. So, but that there are two. But if when people are informed, or at least pay attention, there are two ways that they can come to such strong disagreements. One is that they have very different value systems. So, for example, a libertarian may see what's going on right now as, while they may disagree with certain things, they may be like, well, they're really, really, making the government smaller, so all this other stuff doesn't really matter that much. So they may think in those terms. Or in like a technological accelerationist, maybe like, well, they're getting past all the bureaucracy, they're getting us to Mars, and none of the rest really matters. And somebody, and there may be people in this country that think, we need to uphold law and order, and the people that came illegally, even if it means separating families, like, it needs to be done. Like, that's, it's we need to uphold the law. Like, there may be people that think like that, though that's very far from my own thinking personally. Like, I personally would value compassion over that. So one is value systems, and the other way that people can come to very strong disagreements would be completely different perceptions of reality. And like, we get these very different perceptions of reality because if you look at Fox News and you look at CNN, they're reporting very, very
Yes.
different things.
Yes. Yes.
But when I look at them, I see them both reporting propaganda. My definition of propaganda is like telling one side of the story, and they're both
Yes.
just telling one side of the story, often with lies mixed in,
Yes.
or half truths. So I guess the question here is, which of those, I mean, do you think both of those are factors in the fact that there's such polarization, and that this kind people are supporting one side or the other? Both are factors. And
definitely.
do you think one of them is a more important factor than the other? Like sort of like propaganda polarization versus like different value systems?
I think it would very much depend on the person.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. I know you only have a few minutes left, so I wanna just focus in on a couple of quick questions about these. If you have a few minutes, maybe do you have
Sure.
like 5 to 10 minutes
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
finish it up?
Yeah.
Yeah,
As long as
that
you
would be
want.
cool. Thank you, thank you. I capped it at because I think that we had that 5 o'clock stop time, and then I have another live stream at 6 with Sister Jenna, which is going to be another similar conversation, an interesting person also. So okay, let's start with the propaganda is a big thing. The propaganda that is okay. So there's Fox News says one thing, CNN says another thing. They show different sides of reality. Many people only watch one or the other. They
Yes.
sort of
Yes.
see it as part of their identity.
Yes.
Like they see the other side and they're like, no, 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 and they get so angry when they hear the other side talking that they don't even want to listen to it. Obviously, I think part of that is because the way that each of the news channels presents itself is intentionally trying to create these sort of angry communities of viewers that
Yes.
stick with them all the time so that they can sell a lot of ads. So however these media channels are set up, it's clearly propaganda. And one of the worst things that I saw in terms of propaganda was from CNN, and I was surprised by it because they kept talking about that before the election, Trump is saying that if he loses, it's going to be a bloodbath, and they were saying that over and over. And then I watched Joe Rogan, Trump on Joe Rogan, or Elon on Joe Rogan or something, and they were talking about how even that was totally taken out of context. Like, actually, in the speech, he was talking about the auto industry and how the auto industry was going to lose to the Japanese auto industry, and because of not having tariffs or whatever. And when I heard that, and I was like, really? That's really not what CNN was saying. And like and even Obama was saying that on stage. Even Kamala was saying that on stage, that they kept repeating this bloodbath thing. And then I looked at the actual speech where Trump had been talking about that. It was clearly about the Japanese auto industry taking over. And I was like, wow, like
Yeah.
they're just lying. Like, and even Obama, even Kamala, like the people that I had thought were like these great heroes or whatever. And it's like, that kind of made me just question reality. And it's like, do I really know what I think I know? But both sides do the same thing. So it's the question is like, when you see that type of thing happening, how can we even perceive reality? How can we even see reality clearly when there's so much misinformation on social media also, like there's bots and like
Yeah,
AI
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
like making false claims and false news. That's literally, it's how do you know what's real?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with I don't know if this analogy is going to work or not, but assuming we, just for the sake of argument, that we take scientific inquiry as a paradigm for wanting to find the truth of how things are.
Mm,
Okay, just so most scientists are not trying to discover the truth about every field of science. They 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 are focusing on one particular area of research and taking a deep dive into it. So just to make the comparison, to hold the question, well, how can I know the truth of everything that's going on?
mm,
That seems like an impossible task.
mm,
It's too much. We can't do that. But this is why I keep coming back to, for those issues that seem most important to us, and it may be more than one, but whether it's the separation of families, of immigration, or the cutting of Medicaid, or whatever it is that touches us, and we feel this is really, I feel this is really important, we could take a deep information dive into that particular arena.
mm.
And that would take some effort, but if we're limiting our scope, I think it's quite possible to really look at all the different sources of information and to get a pretty clear picture of what we could call the truth of that situation.
Yeah, but the
But
when we look at a big picture, like the character of the Trump
yeah,
or the Musk, for example, that's a very hard one to be. But what you see is the propaganda on both sides. And why I'm bringing this up is that we're talking about like how kind people can end up on completely opposite sides of this. And some are watching Fox News where it says, "Oh, these guys are great characters. They're super helpful and they're cutting through all the
yeah,
bureaucracy." And then the other side is, no, these guys are trying to take over the entire government, and like they paint them as very different
I
characters.
know, but
Yeah.
that's why I think for we have our own opinion about the character, and in a way, I would just leave it at that for that issue. We have
Mm,
our own intuitive sense of how people are, but in terms of how I can help and actually addressing particular issues, we could leave that aside and say, okay, in this issue, really, really explore it to the point where we feel like we really do understand the whole of it, or as much as possible. And then that will indicate to us, okay, where can I intervene in this? Where
mm,
can I have some efficacy in what I do? So it just feels to me, by limiting the arena of our inquiry and interest, it actually gives us more power to effect some kind of results, to just kind of stew in our perception of somebody's character, which I don't disagree with with your assessment,
mm,
but it doesn't go anyplace
mm. Well,
in terms of what I can do to help in a particular situation.
it just it does affect how we vote,
Yeah,
and
no, that
obviously like that's the character is what people end up voting on. It's not,
yes,
sometimes it is on specific policies, but most of the time it's the overall character that people are voting
yeah,
on.
yes. So in
Mhm.
terms of voting, I think that's we do assess that, but
Mm.
that only happens once every 2 years.
Right, yeah. No, but
And so
yeah.
what do we do in between if we want to be responsive to what we see is going on? We have to say, okay, well, where can I actually have some effect?
Mm,
To me, that's otherwise. we're just kind of
Yeah, I guess I think of it
indulging our
in
own mindset.
yeah, I guess I think of my responsibility in terms of, you know, being a media outlet, a meditation magazine, to try to make the world a better place in general, a happier place. I've been doing that through meditation in general. But now, you know, with the things that are going on right now, I've felt that it's needed to try to you know, I grew up. I think you also. We both grew up Jewish. As I'm pretty sure you grew up Jewish, right?
Yeah,
I grew up in a Jewish family, and what one thing that we were told over and over again in school was that the Nazis were able to do what they did because good men sat by and did nothing, you know,
right.
and didn't speak out and didn't you know, take a stand against them. And I think seeing what's happening right now, it feels like I understand a little bit about maybe why people were like that, because
Hmm.
seeing how people don't stand up right now, even with from one point of view, democracy is being destroyed like very quickly in this country. But people are, and people go out and do protests and stuff, but the majority of people don't. Most majority of people just don't do anything. And I have a idea theory that it's because people are seeing that there's propaganda on both sides and they're not really sure what's real. And if we could know, if everybody in this country knew for sure a democracy is being destroyed right now, then everybody would stand up. Like, we have this right to bear arms, right? There's the right to bear arms so that we could stop the tyrannical government from destroying democracy. Meanwhile, everybody's bearing arms, but nobody's stopping the government from destroying democracy. So what's the point of the right? I don't know. That's just something that I was thinking about. But if there's a confusion, if there's propaganda that makes everybody confused and people don't see clearly, then it's very hard to act. It's very hard to act when you don't see clearly. Like, even if you're trying to, like, you know, they say the fog of war. Like, if soldiers that are in combat, if you can't see, if you don't know what's going on, it's very hard to act. It's very hard to take the right actions. Same thing in this situation. It's sort of like a fog of propaganda, and we don't know what's going on, and it's very hard to act. It's very hard to know where to shoot, like what to do. You know, and I think that that's one of the big problems that makes it hard to take action, is that we can't, it's hard to know what's real. And it's not just about a particular policy, it's about the characters of the people involved. How to know what are they really actually just corrupt evil people trying to take over, or are they actually just trying to make things better in their own way? Maybe they're both, I don't know. But it would be good to understand these things. I guess as you said, it can be very difficult, and maybe we don't have a way to understand them. So for now, I just like to move on to my last bullet point here, which was about value systems. So we had these two ways that people can end up disagreeing and being polarized onto different parts of the spectrum. One is like they're getting totally different perceptions of reality, and the other is because of the propaganda, and then the other is the value systems, that every people hold different value systems. So, like, for example, someone who believes in small government is probably happy with what the government is doing right now. People who believe in, you know, trying to take care of those less fortunate are unhappy about it. You know, so even though both of them may have kind intentions, they may have very different views on what's the right way to go about things. So, and then there may be even greater value mismatches. So, like, for example, like my value of diversity is good. You know, we're all humans. We're all equal. You know, like that type of value system may conflict with somebody who, for example, comes from a certain religion or something like that, that tells them that there's certain type of people that are better than others, whether it's members of their own religion or members of their own race. That's a big value mismatch. So between these small value mismatches of like libertarian versus, you know, uh, moderate socialist or whatever, versus so small value mismatch, maybe we can, you know, be friends and have conversation. Big value mismatch, like it's really harder to have that kind of conversation. But how do we find the peace and the unity and the understanding and the path forward when we're in conversation with, and when we're in a country with, intertwined with people with such different value systems.
Well, I mean, to me, it comes back to what I started the conversation with,
Mm,
and it's not a particular it's not a prescription for a particular action, but it is a prescription for a foundation out of which our actions can come.
mm,
And that, again, it's reiterating what I said at the beginning, establishing in ourselves the equanimity which can hold opposing viewpoints rather than be instinctively reactive, right? So we just see clearly. That to me is the essence of being able to see clearly through the whole mess, right? That we just make our minds very spacious and equanimous, and then also cultivate that quality of compassion so that we're responding to particular situations of suffering. Because compassion is that it's the verb, it's to act to try to alleviate suffering, right? And so we bring it down to immediate situations where we can have an effect to alleviate suffering. And I think so. I'm suggesting that we start almost from the bottom up. And what I hear you talking about is more how do we address it from the top down?
mm,
And I'm not sure we can do it from the top down,
mm,
except perhaps in elections,
mm.
right? So that's where that perspective, we have some agency. But other than that, I think our agency is from the bottom up, where we're seeing where the suffering is. Okay, how do I address this arena of suffering?
Mm.
And I think there are many opportunities for us to do that in all kinds of arenas.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it.
Yeah, thank you. And just in the last thing I wanted to ask is just in terms of value systems. So I think that we as meditators tend to have these value systems of compassion and contemplative, like self assessment, or self reflection is the word. Yeah. Uh, Others don't necessarily have those values. So some people think of those as waste of time or weakness. Um, some may have the values that you have to, you sort of be militaristic about your way of being, and enforce things with strength, and very different values. So many different kinds of values. There's even, like I was mentioning, like legitimately racist values that people hold. Or things like that we might find abhorrent. What do you do in a conversation with one person like that, for example? Do you try to respect their point of view even if you vehemently disagree with it? Do you try to understand it? Do you try to do you believe that yours is better or more correct than theirs? You know what I mean? These are hard questions.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you remember. Do you remember the newscaster David Brinkley?
No, I don't.
Back, you're too young, but
Yeah,
he was a
maybe.
big news broadcaster when I
Mhm.
was growing up. He wrote a book, and the title of his book was "Everyone is Entitled to My Opinion," which is, and so I'll tie that back into a teaching from the, I think it was a 17th century Zen master. His name was Bankai, and very iconoclastic Zen master, and wonderful teachings. One line in them really jumped out at me. He said, "Don't side with yourself." And just as a general principle, and it doesn't mean that we don't have our viewpoints, which we do, but in dialogue, if we're trying to understand, then we have to let go of that
at least for a time, in order to try to understand where the other person is coming from. And maybe we will and maybe we won't. And, if people are really locked into a view and they're not engaging from the same place, it may be difficult, and sometimes not successful. But I think there's a potential, at least with certain people of opposing views, that it could really be an interesting dialogue if if we can let go of attachment to our own viewpoint and really take an interest. Well, why do you feel that way? And what does that mean for the consequences of certain actions? So it's actually an inquiry,
Mm.
uh, but it's finding the right people to do that with,
Yeah.
which is not always easy.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Joseph, for being with me here today. I want to acknowledge some of the commenters. Thank you, Halona and Anthony, for your comments. I'm just gonna flash one up on the screen here. I think, yeah, looking for common ground with those whose core values or even programming are polar opposites is quite a task. Maybe to be hopeful is more productive than despair. To be
Mhm.
hopeful that we can come together in our and try to understand each other. I'm not sure. You can maybe clarify that if you want to, Anthony. But it is a difficult thing to find common ground with those whose core values are so opposite from ours. That's like I'm just trying to like there are some things that I just see as so clear and so fundamental. All humans are equal, like not like different races are inferior or superior. I think that's so, and it's sad that this has to be such a big conversation about right now because it's. I thought we were already over that hump that people really got that. For I thought that people saw that, but I think there are actually people that don't believe that. There is a lot of people. If you look at X, look at any feed on X, what it used to be called Twitter, there clearly a lot of people don't believe that anymore. Um, and it's I don't know, it's hard to engage with. It's very hard to
But
engage with that.
just to say that a lot of people uh, may have different values than we do, but don't ascribe to that value.
Of
That,
course, yes.
you know,
There's many. I think that there's and I'm trying not to even denigrate that value, which is so abhorrent to me. But I'm trying not to denigrate it because some people may hold that value for some reason that I don't fully understand, and I'm trying not to to consider my own values to be correct and others to be wrong. And I don't know, maybe that's wrong of me. Maybe I should say, you know what, is in some cases there are values that are just wrong, but I just find it hard to know where to draw that line. Where do you draw that line? Like, you know what I mean? Maybe like if you're going to draw that line on racists and say that's an abhorrent value and that should where do you maybe you should draw that line on other values too. So like I was saying, there are like light disagreements in values, like let's say libertarian versus like moderate Democrat or something like that, versus and like those people can kind of get along. Okay, like I think it should be smaller government, I think it should be a little bit bigger government, like whatever. It's not that nobody's gonna get into a heated argument so much about that. But for something like really people who believe that we should treat different races differently because or deport
yes,
people because they come from a certain nationality or something like that. And that's good because we got to get rid of those guys because they're bad. Like like they're versus the sort of my perspective, and I think the most meditators' perspective that like people are we're all humans.
yes, yes.
Like uh, I just don't know. Like do you think it's better to condemn those types of values that we see as just so bad, but then or do you think it's better to what, like I'm not going to judge it, I'm not going to side with myself, I'm going to engage with those people that are holding those racist values, and I'm just going to engage with them in the same way that I would engage with somebody who holds a slightly different value for me, and just try to understand them you know
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we give up our own value system.
Mm,
I'm I'm suggesting that it's helpful to at least try to understand where the other people are coming from, especially if we feel that there is some foundation of basic goodness in them.
Yeah.
You know, because that could possibly be the place of some level of connection, even if it's manifest with very different views about things. But it's not to suggest that we don't honor and act on the things we feel are important.
Yeah.
And I need to go now.
Okay. Thank you so much for everybody who commented. Thank you so much, Joseph, for taking the time to have this very difficult conversation with me. It can be difficult at times. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time.
Great. It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So
great.
the excerpts will be included in the magazine, and I hope that you have a great day.
Great. Thank you.
See you
Bye.
later. Bye.